Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Good Friday for those of you that celebrate. Welcome to the Friday Forum today. Our topic will be diversity, equity, and inclusion and public relations. Our moderator and panelists are all DE&I experts and members of the faculty at Elon University. This will be our 76th Friday Forum since 2020, which seems crazy to me, but we're doing this. So I'm Karen Smythe. I am the producer of the Friday Forum. And what started off as really an informal opportunity for communicators looking for resources on navigating through the pandemic has turned into what we call the industry's team meeting. And we've had very engaging and inspiring speakers from across the country. So I'm so proud of all the contributions our board members provide to keep this content of value, whether it's career advice, information you can use in your daily work or with clients, just networking. So shout out to everyone today. Tell us where you are joining us from. We like to say Silicon Valley is a state of mind. So I love it when I see people who are outside our geographic boundaries joining us. And speaking of geography, we have some representation today from the PRSA Puget Sound, and that is Amy Blondin. So Amy, take it away. Welcome your Puget Sounders.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Blondin. I'm the 2022 president for the PRSA Puget Sound chapter. I just want to thank PRSA Silicon Valley for the ongoing partnership and work together to bring these really thought-provoking events beyond the Silicon Valley. I hadn't heard it's a state of mind, but I love that. So welcome to all the Puget Sound chapter members and guests. And without further ado, let's get into this.
Yeah. So now I'm going to jump right in. We've got a full panel today, and I want to make sure we've got enough time for our speaker introductions, in addition to a really rich conversation on such an important topic. So here today to introduce our moderator is PRSA Silicon Valley's own Judy Cushman. She's a longtime member, and she's also active with the Puget Sound chapter as well. Judy leads our sponsorship efforts to support programs like the Friday Forum, as well as our Media Predicts, our annual program in December. So Judy, welcome. I'll let you kick things off. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I want to say, first of all, these programs are always a learning experience for me and for everyone who attends, but especially for me. And Elon was not on my radar until I started to do this work into the DE&I area. And I want to put in a kudo to Elon for being such an incredibly important school and university. And Elon is in Elon, North Carolina. So coming from the West Coast, it wasn't really something I would trip over, but it is a marvelous, marvelous school. And I just wanted to say that they have over 1,400 students and more than 80 faculty members. And our moderator that I'm going to introduce is the dean of the school. So that is Dr. Rochelle Ford. And I'm going to read you a little bit about her bio, and she's going to take it away with a panel. And we are going to leave time for questions at the end. Hopefully we'll do that. We'll have it in the chat about 10 minutes before we wrap up. And let me tell you about Dr. Ford. She conducts research about diversity in advertising and public relations and has written a monthly column, Diversity Dimensions for Public Relations Tactics. It's an award-winning trade newspaper. She has been a member of the boards of the PRSA Foundation, PRSA nationally, and the American Advertising Federation's Mosaic Center. Dr. Ford served for 4 years as a professor and the chair of the Public Relations Department at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse. She spent 16 years teaching at Howard. In 2018, she was inducted into the PR Week Hall of Fame. She co-chairs the Arthur Page Society's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So Dr. Ford, please begin, and I am all ears. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting Elon University to be a part of your program. While you say we are centered, of course, here in North Carolina, we actually have a presence in California. We have a campus right in Hollywood. So we used to run a program even in the Bay Area, and we still have a large component of students who are from the West Coast. So we really are across the nation, including New York City, where we have a presence, and in Washington, D.C. Campus of about 7,000. And I'm really, really excited with the diversity that we have brought to the table in terms of expertise of faculty who not only teach and study public relations, but have a lot of experience professionally working in the industry. So I'd like to introduce to you three of my faculty colleagues, again, who are amazing professionals and scholars. So the first one that I would like to introduce is Dr. Vanessa Bravo. Dr. Bravo is the chair of our strategic communications department, and she is an expert in the Latin American population with globally, does work in public diplomacy, as well as looking and studying how to reach Latinos or the Latinx community in public relations at audiences, increasing diversity within organizations. She recently published a book that looks at public diplomacy in the Latin American diaspora. We are super excited that Dr. Bravo has decided to join the academia after being a journalist and a professional communicator. So, Dr. Bravo, thank you so much for joining us. In addition to Dr. Bravo, we have Dr. Denise Hill, APR, who is actually on our national PRSA board. And Dr. Hill, in addition to serving on the PRSA National Board, is also the chair of the Diversity Action Alliance, which is a coalition of individuals and corporations who have been dedicated to increasing the diversity within their PR teams and agencies, as well as creating a more inclusive environment where all employees can strive and thrive within those organizations. In addition to doing all of that volunteer work within the industry, Dr. Hill brings a wealth of experience as a chief communications officer and is now a renowned scholar looking at the history of African Americans and diversity within our public relations industries. We're super excited to have Dr. Hill to be joining us. Thank you for being here, Dr. Hill. And our third panelist is Michelle Lashley. Michelle Lashley joins us being an expert not only in public relations, but also in graphic design. And not only in graphic design, she is also an attorney. And so I like to tease her and say that she's a triple threat because she kind of does it all. But we are excited to have Dr. Lashley, who will be speaking to us. I guess gave you a doctorate, but you are.
I know, I noticed that. I'll take it.
Esquire, yes. She will be joining us and talking about the LGBTQIA plus community and looking at representation within the public relations industry. I'm excited to have this group of scholars and professionals to join us because diversity, equity, inclusion is not just a nice thing to do, it is the green thing to do. Back in the 1990s, when James and Larissa Grenig led the Excellence Study to find out what would make organizations more effective and efficient in doing communications management, they said one of those things has to be diversity. How do we become more inclusive so that we can move our organizations forward? Since the 90s, now we have to put it into practice. It's not a theory thing, it is actually a business imperative. The more diversity that you have at the table, representing lots of different types of people, the more creative approaches to solving the problems and challenges that face us on a daily basis. You'll have diversity of thought. So I hope that today you'll get a glimpse into three different approaches or working with different types of communities, the Latinx community, African American communities, as well as the LGBTQIA communities. Now, here's a caveat. Just like no one would say, how do I target market white people? No one ever says that. Why? Because everyone recognizes that there's diversity within Caucasian Americans. The same thing within the LGBTQIA community. It's not a monolithic group. The same thing with African Americans, not monolithic, and definitely not within the Hispanic communities. Of course, they represent many, many different countries and different levels of acculturation when you look at the United States. Societal culture. So when you hear these high level presentations, recognize that there is no single magic bullet. You have to do research in all of these communities, whether you are looking at it from an internal staffing perspective of what you're trying to do within your organizations or trying to reach in these different audiences. So make sure that you listen to this with that lens as you consider what my colleagues, both scholars and professional, as well in our industry, offer today. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over first to Professor Bravo, who will introduce us to a little bit more of the Latinx communities.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much for having us, and we are very excited to be talking about this topic. I wanted to start, given that this is an event organized by PRSA, um, reminding us about the definition that we use for public relations. And PRSA website says that PR is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. However, sometimes there is a big disparity in terms of how some organizations and their publics look like and behave. So I was checking a study by Harvard Business Review that was done in 2018, and this is really of federal workers, so it's not all encompassing of the whole industry in the United States, but in public relations at that level, 8% of people who practice public relations are African American, 6% Latinx, and 3% Asian. That leaves about 83% of the industry that is white. And while those numbers could be fine in other contexts, the fact is that in the United States, the white population is 60%. So there is a disparity there in terms of who is in the industry. And that has an impact uh, in for the industry to attract employees, to retain employees. It has an impact in universities. It has an impact on whether students see themselves in our area. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about diversity in the United States in general, and then to come back to the field of strategic communications. So in 2020, 4 out of 10 US residents were not white. And by 2050, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that half of the population of the United States will be not white, and Latinx people are going to be about 25% of those residents. So it is really important as an industry for us to think about diversity, about, in the most simplistic way, having a seat at the table. Representation matters, and it's always important to ask, is it really mattering where we work? In other words, are different communities and groups represented at our organizations? What about, for instance, in senior levels, in leadership roles, in the communication tactics or strategies that we employ? Are we communicating without stereotypes, without misrepresentations, without generalizing, with nuanced knowledge about the communities that we are trying to reach? And as Dr. Ford was saying, that requires knowledge, that requires research, that requires approaching these communities constantly and constantly learning more and more about their experiences in the United States. But it's not the only type of diversity. Half of the population in the United States are women. As I was telling you, 60% are white, but 19% of people are of Latino origin. And let me remind you that being Latino is not a race, it's an ethnic origin, because we have Black Latinos, we have white Latinos, Asian Latinos, mixed race Latinos, you name it. About 13% of residents in the United States are African American, 6% are of Asian origin, and about 2 to 3% Native Americans or biracial or multiracial. There are other types of diversity, obviously. For instance, this number actually surprises me. 30% of people in the United States are not affiliated with a religion. And about 20% of people say that they have a disability that impacts them in their everyday life. So I just wanted to offer, and I think we can bring this back to the PR industry, but a quick overview of Latinos in the United States, in part to erase a few myths. So out of the 330 million people who live in the United States, about 60 million are of Latino origin. Again, that's about 19% of the population. Of those, 70% are US born Americans. So they were born and raised in the United States as American as you can get, American citizens all the way, 70%. 10% more are people who were born somewhere else and became US citizens. And that's my case. I'm originally from Costa Rica and now I have dual citizenship. I'm also an American citizen. So that takes us to 80%. So only 20% of Latinos in the United States are undocumented. And in the large majority of cases, they are here working hard, trying to make a living, trying to give their children the opportunity that maybe they didn't have at home. 70% of Latinos say that they speak English very well, and that's their main language at home, even if they speak also some Spanish at home. And for example, when people talk about things such as the Latino vote, I always cringe a little bit because there are so many different communities of Latinos all around the United States that is really hard to compare Latinos in California to Latinos in Phoenix to Latinos in Florida or in North Carolina. But not only that, even when you say something like, oh, yeah, Latinos in Arizona tend to be liberal, and Cubans in Miami tend to be conservative, even that is really very simplistic. Cubans in Miami, yes, there is a tendency to be conservative, but there are different generations of Cubans in Miami, people who arrived to the United States at different times, in different decades, people who were born here and who have different perspectives. And so it's very important, again, to always consider who is our audience. Do we really know what they look like, what they think about, how do they think about different issues? When was the last time we were really in contact with these communities? And again, do we are we representing these communities in our own workplace? Because if we look around and there are groups and communities that are not there, we have a problem and we need to really pause and think what can we do about that, which I have a few suggestions, but later down the road. So I was told to keep this short, so I'm going to stop here for now, and then we can come back to talk about Latinos in the United States.
Dr. Bravo, I really appreciate your comments because, as you said, there's a lot of misconceptions or who is within the Latinx communities, and looking and understanding that the vast majority are born here, are U.S. citizens, and another large majority are naturalized. And that's a big misconception, particularly because of what we hear on the news. And one of the key things that you repeated over again, you have to know what the community is, and you have to do research. The bottom line is there is diversity within all of these groups, but unless you do research on your issue, dealing with that local community, you will not know what is salient, what is not, what language to use, etc. So it goes back to doing your homework on the ground. So thank you so much for sharing. Next, I'd like to move to Dr. Denise Hill. And Dr. Hill, can you take it away?
Thank you very much, Dean Ford. I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I want to start by talking about a campaign that has been around for many, many, many years. And I'm sure you've heard of the campaign. And that campaign is the Dove campaign for real beauty. That campaign is a full marketing communications campaign that was developed in 2004. That's how long the campaign has been around. And the reason it was developed was to help women and young girls improve their self-esteem. So the word real beauty, the initial focus was on showing women in advertisements, real women versus models. And the campaign has met with a little bit of criticism, but primarily the campaign has been lauded. Very, very positive feedback on that particular campaign. So again, Dove campaign for real beauty, around since 2004. In 2011, Dove developed an advertisement for one of its body washes. And in that advertisement, it showed a woman with brown skin, a Black woman, and the skin shown was rough. And then if you use the body wash, the image was your skin got softer, and where the soft skin was shown was a white woman. Dove faced significant backlash for that. And as we know, that campaign, it was an advertisement, so that may not have been created by a public relations person, a PR person may not have been aware of it, but that goes into the realm of crisis communications. And we all know who's responsible for crisis communications. So Dove developed a media statement, apologized. However, 2011 is when that happened. In 2017, Dove introduced another body wash. And in this advertisement, the Black woman who was wearing a t-shirt the color of her skin was shown in the advertisement removing the t-shirt. And as she removed it using the body wash, the final image was a white woman. So Dove repeated what it had done in 2011, repeated the mistake. And once again, significant backlash, significant media coverage, and the PR team jumps in and develops a crisis communications plan and a media statement, and Dove apologizes, saying it missed the mark. Now, that is just one example, two examples from one company. So in this presentation, we could have a whole presentation with many, many such examples. For example, the ad with Heineken, lighter is better. I won't even go into detail what that image was. There was another example. American Greeting Cards developed a Father's Day card, and on the cover of the card was an image, and the word there was baby daddy. American Greetings faced backlash for that, as did Target, who carried that particular greeting card. So once again, the crisis communications team steps in. Now, it is the responsibility of public relations people. Again, we may not have created these advertisements. It is our responsibility to be aware of the environment. That is something that we do as part of our jobs. The environment from a social standpoint, the environment from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a legal standpoint. That is something that falls within our purview. So it is up to us in our jobs, we've heard a little bit about audience, to be fully aware of audiences and the difference in audiences, especially in relation to the environment. And that was brought to our attention 2 years ago in a way that none of us ever wanted to have to hear about or experience, because the atrocity was the murder of George Floyd. And because of that, we all heard a number of companies make an attempt to step up and issue a statement saying, we stand with our Black employees. This is appalling. We stand with our employees. We are going to take action. The issue is how many of those companies actually took action, and what is our role, again, as public relations practitioners, to make sure that our companies are aware of what's happening from an external environmental standpoint, and spurring them to take action, the right action. As part of that action in 2020, Ben & Jerry's issued a statement, and their statement was, to achieve justice and action, we don't just need thoughts and prayers. We need education and action. And Ben and Jerry's then linked and said to learn about the country's history, the United States history, its impact on the present, and the conditions that led to the murder of George Floyd. Here is more information. So, as public relations people, it is up to us to do the same and to make sure that those in our organizations, especially those in leadership positions, are doing the same, so that we are not just issuing words, but that there are actions behind our words. And I mentioned history, and Ben and Jerry's statement that mentioned history. So I want to mention Black History Month. And this is May, and it's not Black History Month. And what happens every February is companies issue a statement or do some action that acknowledges Black History Month. However, George Floyd was not murdered in February. He was murdered in May, and other Black men and people have been murdered in other months throughout the year. And there is racism that happens 12 months a year. And part of the reason, again, if we look at history, if you look at the Ben and Jerry statement that said, go back and look at the history of the United States to see how we came to be where we are. So for us as public relations people, when we look at audiences, so we are responsible for audiences and targeting audiences, one of the things that we need to do is we need to be aware that Black history is US history. So that's something that we need to be aware of, not just in February, but 12 months a year. The other thing, if we adopt this mindset, so we look at ourselves as communicators in interacting with audiences and developing messages for diverse audiences. The other aspect to this is our industry itself. So within the public relations industry, we have acknowledged that we have a diversity problem. However, that problem is not somebody else's problem. That problem lies with every single individual within the public relations industry. The Diversity Action Alliance issued a report last year based on 2019 data. They're issuing a new report shortly. And that data showed that our industry, the public relations industry, is 78% white. It is 7% African American, 6% Hispanic, and 6% Asian. Those numbers don't align with the population of the United States. So we need to do better as an industry, and as practitioners, we need to do better because, again, that's our responsibility as well. So we have responsibility in two areas in how we communicate as practitioners to audiences, but then within our own industry and taking action to improve the diversity within our own industry.
You know, if I was in church, I would say amen. I feel like I need to say that right now because everything you said was so critical. We can look at so many case studies. You can go on and on with case studies of companies and organizations like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. But then don't put any sort of mechanisms in play to avoid those same mistakes from happening over and over again. Or they'll issue statements, but if they turn the mirror on to themselves, they would see the same sort of societal problems happening within their own organizations because they didn't create mechanisms to support not only recruiting diverse talent, but keeping them there beyond 1 to 3 years and helping them to achieve into managerial roles within the organizations. And when you look at what people say why they leave, it's some of the same problems of racism and other ethnocentrism or creating hostile environments for people from different gender and affectional identities. And so we have to stop operating from a crisis communication standpoint. How do we be proactive and preventative so that we message test with different audiences to say, is this problematic? And we keep an ongoing pulse on what's happening politically, socially, economically, legally, so that we, which now is fascinating when you read a lot of the trust studies that Edelman and others do, that our or companies and organizations are more trusted than even the media. So how do we enter into this discourse, because we ourselves are looking to improve our own organizations, and how can we affect societal change with the power that exists within organizations? So thank you so much for that. And so, Professor Lashley, if you could bring it home, and then we're going to open it up with questions that people can type into the chat as well. But Professor Lashley, your turn.
So I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse that I'm going last, but at least everybody can see how blessed I am to be surrounded by such amazing colleagues. So I'm going to be talking just a few minutes about the LGBTQ plus community and representation within the PR industry, and also some best practices to consider when communicating with this community. So before I do that, though, I want to sort of set the table, and this is something that's been on my mind a lot recently, as well as others, and that is the rise in anti-LGBTQ legislation that we're seeing in the country right now, which is, to me, frightening. Having grown up in the 80s and 90s, I remember hiding from my family, from people at work. And this is sort of bringing up some of that again for me. And I was just looking to see in a report by NBC News last month, 41 anti-LGBTQ bills were filed within state legislatures in 2018. But in the first 3 months of this year, there have been 238 bills filed. And one of the things that makes this really scary is that last year, 2021, that had been labeled by some advocates as being the worst year in recent history for LGBTQ state legislative attacks, when 191 bills were filed, and that was for the entire year. So in some ways, we are a much more accepting and I don't like the word tolerating, because I think that's not what we're after. It's about acceptance. Society than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago, but with this renewed focus on targeting the LGBTQ community, it started a lot with anti-trans bills, and it's now grown to cover everything, as some of you may be aware of the Don't Say Gay bill, or law now down in Florida. And as a personal aside, I have a son, and I thank God that he is now in college, because I think if this had been the case with him in elementary school or middle school or even high school, would he have been able to talk about the fact that he had two moms, and how would teachers have responded to that? So that's the environment that we're looking at now within the United States. And it makes it tricky for companies about where to take stands and where to remain neutral or silent. And so we'll get to that in a minute. But in terms of the PR industry, I certainly have found, I think others have found it to be, historically, at least in my career, a fairly welcoming place for those in the LGBTQ plus community. But one of the main issues is that representation of this community typically comes in the form of cisgender gay white men. You see them at all levels of leadership, including the C-suite. And yeah, there are a lot of women within the PR industry. The majority of them do not identify as being LGBTQ plus. And there are very few out gay women, and even few out gay women of color in leadership positions. So that's something where we could say, yes, it is a welcoming industry, but have we really addressed all of the letters in LGBTQIA? And part of that part of the responsibility for that rests on those of us within the community, in terms of being out ourselves and representing ourselves, and being more visible But that takes a lot of courage. And I think especially for those of us who are a little bit older, there's still that tendency to want to shut it down and not really talk about it as openly. But again, I would say that the PR industry gets a good grade. I don't know what that grade would be, but it gets a good grade in terms of representation. Now, in terms of best practices for communicating with the LGBTQ plus community, just like Dr. Bravo said, and Dr. Hill and Dean Ford, this is a diverse community. We are not monolithic. We're not all the same. We're different ages. We view gender differently. We have different political affiliations, different religions, different cultures. And so we don't all think the same way, and messages don't all resonate with us in the same way. So one of the issues recently has been about gender, and Forbes ran an article last year that spoke of, and the term was genderation. And so one of the parts of that is how I think particularly younger people in the community are much more accepting of how anybody identifies in terms of either non-binary or asexual or gay or lesbian or whatever it might be. But there's still others that are trying to wrap their head around that. But one of the main ways I see this is the use of the word queer. I think that a lot of young people in the community are trying to take that word back and own it, and they use it in a really powerful way, which is great. Those of us who are a little older still see it as a very derogatory term, and would not use that as a way to describe ourselves because of the way it makes us feel different when that's not how we want to feel. So one of the things is, in terms of that, goes back to what Dr. Ford said. And that is, before you use certain terms in communications, test those with the audience. So for instance, if it were a message to those where I would be the target audience, that would really turn me off. But others, they would really resonate with that. The other thing, and everybody knows this, be sensitive to stereotypes. So much of the world looks at the LGBTQ plus community through the lens of sexual orientation, which is really uncomfortable because that's probably one of the last things a lot of us would say if we were asked to describe ourselves and our priorities. So for me, being a mom, being a daughter, being a sister, being a colleague, being a professor, being a friend, those are ways in which I would express my identity, and those are my priorities. There are a couple of shows on television that come to mind that I think did this really well. One was it was on ABC Family. It was called The Fosters, which featured two women who had kids and they had jobs, and they experienced all the things that any other couple would experience. And I thought that was well done. I think also if you're a fan of Schitt's Creek, you'll understand what I'm talking about in terms of the relationship between David and Patrick and the community that surrounded them. Their relationship wasn't used as a pulpit to make any proclamations about a stand. It was just their relationship, and the community accepted them as just another couple. It wasn't something that had to be labeled or called out. So it'd be nice to see that in ads and other types of communications. We don't really see that nearly as much as we need to. I'd also suggest including LGBTQ speakers, like when you have programs that you're putting on for clients, or even in-house programs like Lunch and Learns. It's nice to be able to see representation. I think that my colleagues would say the same, is that it's nice to be able to see representation that makes you proud of who you are, and that represents who you see yourself as. And then again, and Dr. Ford keeps reiterating about this, test your messaging. One gay person at the table isn't enough, because that person doesn't speak for all or even most of us. So, go to specifically to members of the target, that your target audience you're focusing on, and listen to their feedback about the messaging. So I'm going to stop now. I know we were supposed to stop at 5 minutes. So
What you say is so amazingly awesome and on point. One of the things that so many people think is that you have to highlight and lean into the fact that someone is a part of a demographic group. So if I'm going to have a message, I've got to say that this person is part of the LGBT community, or this person is Black, and this person is Latino, as if that is the only part of their identity. All of us are made up from more than what our demographic group is. And so the question for us as professional communicators, and Professor Lashley, you were emphasizing this, when you're coming up with an issue, like if I'm going cereal shopping, I'm not walking into the store to buy cereal and thinking, oh my goodness, I am a Black woman. Let me find a box of cereal that speaks to Black women. No, I'm going in the store because either I'm worried about my weight, and so I'm looking for Special K, right? Or I'm walking in the store because my kids have been bugging me and they want some sugary cereal that I don't want to buy, or my mother says I have to have whole steel oatmeal. And so what is it that is salient to my identity at that purchasing decision, at that decision to go get a mammogram, at that decision to do whatever it is that our organizations are trying to get our various target markets to do? What is salient? And then leaning into that, because it may not always be leading with race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. It might be something else. But then when you think about the images that you want to showcase, how do you put people in their natural, authentic setting that's going to speak with a wide range of audiences? And so when I think about my own team, right, and amazing professionals here, we didn't go and say, let me find the Latino practitioner. No, we said, let's find an expert in public communications who has experience and has the academic credentials. And we need the added value and bonus of having someone from these diverse backgrounds. And when we found the qualified person, and that person additionally is Latino or part of the LGBTQ community, et cetera, it is that added value. But if we lean in and say, oh, we have to just find for quota, that's not what we're talking about. The reality is that they're talented people in all of our disciplines, no matter what that specialization is that you're looking for. But you have to cast a wide enough net to get diverse talent inside your pool. And you also have to make sure that you allow them to avow their own identities and how they want to present themselves versus you ascribing that identity to them. Which is why it's so important to allow people, when you introduce yourself with your own pronouns, then it's going to make it more open for someone who may have different ones to use them, because you've opened the door for that inclusion. And that's the key word, is inclusion. We want everyone to be able to bring their whole self to work. So no matter what my family makeup is, I should feel comfortable coming into that work environment. I should feel comfortable and engaging with your company or your organization. That's what inclusion is. And that's what we need to strive for. And the diversity part only works if you have inclusion, both in what you're trying to do internally as well as with your external environment. So, Mr. Lashley, thank you so much for sharing. Please do at this time put questions and things into the chat box. I think there was one question that Amy put in there: for organizations with limited resources, can you provide some examples of how to do effective message testing? So would anyone like to give some examples of how to do effective message testing? Dr. Hill.
So, one example, if you can't go to external resources, which are often more expensive to do message testing, you can look within your own organization because your employees of your organization are also consumers. So you could start with your employees and form groups within your employee population and test your messages with employee groups. So that way you don't have to go external. You're still getting hopefully diverse audiences within your company instead of paying an outside vendor to do external testing. So that's one example of something that you can do without, if you have limited financial resources.
Also, let me just jump in. There are many groups that are actually very willing to support or collaborate in these efforts. So you might not have the budget to recruit participants for focus groups, but there might be groups on LinkedIn or on Facebook that would be very happy to check your messages and provide feedback. I always mention this example at Elon that when people say, "Well, how do we find Latinos who have PhDs that we can hire as faculty?" Well, I belong to a Facebook group called Latinas Completing Doctoral Degrees, and it has more than 8,000 members. More than 8,000 members. So if you're looking for the very specific group of Latinos who happen to have or are about to have a doctoral degree, there are 8,000 of them out there. There's another one called Latinas in Tech, etc. And you can think about that in every single type of group, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, etc. Right? So there are groups on Facebook, on LinkedIn, that might be happy to participate in message testing and in other initiatives because they want to be seen and they want to be included. And even if there's no money involved, many are very much willing to collaborate as much as possible. That's another idea.
Michelle, I think you had some ideas also. Thank you, Dr. Bravo.
Actually, Vanessa had, because I was going to suggest tapping into your social networks, like on LinkedIn. So yeah, she covered that perfectly. So, and that could apply to any audience that you're looking for. Yep.
Another resource you might want to consider, which is actually right in your backyard, is the Maynard Institute. The Maynard Institute has a study called the Fault Lines, and that will help you to become more culturally sensitive to think about, am I writing stories? Am I doing things about these hosts of different, what they call fault lines within our society? Things like gender, things like race and ethnicity, social economics, and rural versus urban, etc. And you can begin to look and see if you are falling into one of those faults with a negative stereotype or misrepresentation, or cultural annihilation, pretending as if some part of American society doesn't exist because you keep them absent all of the time from your communication. Another thing to consider is that there are guidebooks and style guides available. So the AP Style Book keeps updating itself to be more inclusive of different demographic groups, community groups, so that you can use the most current appropriate language. But the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, the NLGJA, the Native American Journalists group, all these different groups have style guides that say, if you want to report on our communities, here's some loaded language, here's what things mean. And you can begin with creating content that follows those style guides and gives you some insights in terms of proactive, how do I judge what my content might be? And part of that is making sure that your team members get outside of their normal zone. Because if each of us can become a little bit more culturally competent, and we are starting to read and listen to and engage in and go to places that are different than ourselves, then we will probably develop greater sensitivity and insights into various types of communities. But you have to require your team to do the homework on a regular basis so that they will develop additional cultural competencies. So that's probably more than you bargained for, Amy. And I want to get to Phyllis's, but Michelle, do you want to go ahead and add on, and then we'll get to
just really quickly, and I'll post the link in the chat. The HRC campaign is another organization that provides information about how to market to different audiences. So I'll post that in the chat.
So Phyllis's question is, how can we as practitioners of color encourage others to join our profession? Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thank you. I think, of course, there are people who might not be joining our profession because they might not be super aware of what is it that we do and what kind of jobs are out there. So there's that part. But I think we have to do the homework first, in that I think people will want to work in certain industries if they think that they are going to be well received, that they are going to feel that they belong, that they are going to feel appreciated. And so if we are really serious about representing the society that we live, the types of communities that we interact with, we need to really do the work internally as well. Not that one thing cannot go with the other, but do the internal work as well. So again, we just come back to my own community. If we know that Latinos in the United States are almost 20%, if I look at my organization, at my company, do we have about 20% of Latinos as employees? And if the answer is no, why is that? And in part, you can say, well, not in part, but if you say, well, it's hard to find them. We are 60 million people. How can that be that hard to find the appropriate workforce among 60 million people, right? So there are tough questions that we need to ask ourselves. Also, if we are attracting certain groups to be part of our organizations, are we making sure that we also have efforts to retain them? So, for example, there are many organizations that have affinity groups, and that's wonderful because we need a place to get to know other people and socialize and be ourselves and breathe and all that. But we also need other types of programs. For example, mentorship programs, but at high levels. Here I'm talking about, could we pair up a person who is newer in the organization from underrepresented groups with one of the leaders of the organization that can really mentor them in that pathway, to higher levels, and also in a way that they are sponsoring underrepresented employees, for example. Or in terms of recruitment, if you're a company, are you attending job fairs in colleges where you can attract specifically groups of underrepresented, underrepresented groups? For instance, HBCUs or Hispanic serving institutions, or if it's not one of those types of universities, if you're coming to Elon, for instance, are you inquiring whether we have a special session for underrepresented students so that they can connect with our employers? And the answer is yes. If you come to Elon, we will have a session like that. Or are you offering internships that are specific for underrepresented students? Are you eliminating, I hope so, forever unpaid internships that really create barriers for people who cannot afford to accept them? Are you making sure that if an intern comes from a low-income background, you are offering some additional financial support for living expenses, etc.? And then, of course, the communication, is your communication inclusive? Is it consistent about appreciating and fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if that communication is really inclusive and consistent, is it really living up to its promise? And let me stop there for now.
Well, I think you just answered, how can I do outreach to recruit additional people of color and or other underrepresented groups? I like to put it plain and simple, fish where the fish are. If you want to get some salmon, you're going to go to a salmon stream. You're not going to go to a catfish farm. Okay, so you need to find where there are people from those different groups where you have a lack of representation, and build brand equity so that they will want to hook themselves onto your hook and join your organization. But if they've never heard of you, they're not going to refer you to their friends and other people. So build a reputation that you are interested in investing in communities, participate in these different professional organizations, join the DAA, and make an outward commitment that your organization is going to really be active in recruiting and retaining diverse talent, and really making that a personal commitment to become more inclusive. I know that we only left 2 minutes left, and I need to turn it over to your organizers, but I really appreciate you all inviting us. And please know that Elon is here to be your partner. If you would like to have a special program dedicated for your organization, we are more than willing to plan something especially for you. So we look forward to partnering with you, and we hope to see you at future PRSA events. And we'll come out to wherever you are. We'll come up to the Puget Sound. That's a lovely part of the country. I would love that. Thank you for having us.
Hello, this is Judy back again. Do we have Amy there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Amy. How about if you just tell us a little bit about what's happening with Puget Sound, and then we'll have Silicon Valley come and tell us, and then we'll wrap up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the panel. First of all, that was wonderful. And you are welcome in the Puget Sound area anytime. I will personally show you around Olympia, Washington. Just let me know. For the Puget Sound folks on this event, just a reminder that our Summit Awards entry deadline has been extended until midnight, 11:59 p.m. on Monday, the 18th. We heard from some folks that they needed, with spring break and so forth, they needed a little extra time to get their entries in. So please take a look at the Puget Sound website. There's lots of information, and it's pretty easy to apply and enter and share the wonderful work that you've done over the year.
Do you have anything? What's our next program coming up? I think it's in the mental health area.
Yes, we have a program coming up on May 5th. There's information on our website right now. It's related to behavioral health, and I think it's going to be a real thought-provoking and wonderful conversation. So definitely register for that.
Okay. And Silicon Valley. Karen, do we have Karen? Well, we have, are you there?
I am here. Can you see me now?
There we are.
There we go. Thank you. I was stuck backstage waving in no one's virtual world. So thank you, Judy. Thank you, Amy. And thank you so much to our moderator, Dr. Rochelle Ford, and our panelists, Dr. Denise Hill, Dr. Vanessa Bravo, and Michelle Lashley. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We've got, if this is your first time joining us, just know that we are here nearly every Friday at the very same time. So we also have some great shows in May. So this, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. We're showing that screen now. So as well as also announcing our show on the 22nd. It's all about social media. So to learn more about PRSA Silicon Valley, you can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I guess that's it. So I'm going to wrap it up. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much again for joining us. Bye.